And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra. No, you are not in a time warp. The monastery will be returning with Monastery Live later tonight. But before that, I have a opportunity to pull a Bret Hart at WrestleMania with the newest honored guest of the temple, mostly known
How's
as
it
the
going,
Carnal
guys?
Conservative. How's it going? Mostly known as the Carnal Conservative on YouTube, and is currently working on an RPG project called The Shades of Dominion, which that makes two in a row that I've had to deal with shades in a title. How you doing, man?
Doing well, and I'm glad to be in the monastery. I will make it a. I hope to join the tradition of defiling the temple. So
Oh,
hopefully, I live up to the standard.
you'll fit in just fine. And I see means of destruction in the chat because he's everywhere. Um, so I know you did a video on this Shades of Dominion project, but walk let's walk through the basics before we get to the beginning. What it Tell the brothers and sisters what the Shades of Dominion is.
Okay. The Shades of Dominion is essentially a fan-made role-play game that is based very, very loosely, obviously for legal reasons, on the Magic the Gathering card game. Now, this started as a project that I wanted to take on because, and I've been working on this shit for 7 years. It's been a long ass time.
Mm-hmm.
And I started out doing it because no one had ever done it properly. No one, like, if you actually went and searched, like, how I want to roleplay Magic the Gathering, how do I do it? What systems are available? They're all shit. And everyone knows that they're all shit, and so they kind of just put up with it. But I actually sat down and I said, what makes Magic the Gathering, like, as a character? If you were to think of your deck as a character, what makes it so alluring and attractive? And the answer I came up with was, it's not, am I going to win? The question is, how am I going to win? And that's the starting point of making Shades of Dominion.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what it all comes from.
Yeah, and I have taken I will admit that this and maybe I'll do maybe I'll do a video on these in the future, but this is technically not the first time I've seen the whole notion of trying to turn Magic the Gathering into a tabletop game. And can I can I state for the record that when after years of people clamoring for wanting that kind of thing, when Wizards of the Coast decided to finally buckle down, their response was to do a instead of doing its own system, the response was to just put out a setting book for Ravnica.
That was shit. I looked, dude, and I gave it a shot. I read through the book and I looked at what they offered. It was absolute rubbish. I don't like what they turned you into with that whole setting was they turned you into a street pawn for a planeswalker. That's essentially what you were. You were some little low-life wizard or druid or some other D&D class character in the Ravnica setting, being a total bitch to the Dimir, to the Golgari, to the Radkos, to whoever it was you wanted to align yourself with, but you were essentially a pawn. You were a minor player in a setting, and that's not what I made. What I made was you turn a deck, a planeswalker in theory, into a character. And I'll be honest, when you get through all the stats, when you get through character creation, you're creating a 10th level D&D character by comparison. Like, this is not some chumpy first level character that does nothing. You have a full rack of spells. You have stats that actually reflect that planeswalker like strength, because that's what you want to play. That's what you, and so that's what the game.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked at it, I saw what it offered, and I was disappointed even at their attempt, which just kind of made me work even harder.
Yeah, I currently have three different attempts, and like I said, I may do a video on this in the future. The three that I have are Magebane, Magic the Gathering Co-op, and Planeswalker. And all three of them kind of are a little too married to the card game. And
Yes,
but it seems from
yes, and
what little I've been able to glean from what you're doing, you're you're trying to you're trying to replicate the spirit of the source material, but not necessarily the letter.
correct. Um, and it's a delicate line to balance on, because there this system is made with the intention, because and this is something that I'll go over as well. My intentions and my motivations for the game have morphed over time. And one of those morphings was watching what happened with Jeremy Hambley of the Quartering, and how he was completely ostracized from the community because he exposed pedophiles from the judging events
Mm-hmm.
and their judges program. So, touching on that kind of razor's edge of walking between honoring the source material and honoring just, this game is specifically engineered so that everything that Wizards puts out from here on out can be used in the game if translated correctly. So in the Shade Masters section of the rulebook, there are conversion charts for templates, whether they're common, uncommon, throughout all the rarities,
Mm-hmm.
and it alters the cost of the spell. And also, what you have is so everything Wizards of the Coast puts out as soon as this game is released can be turned into a spell template for players to use if they like that spell. So essentially, Wizards of the Coast is going to be working for me and anyone who wants to play the game after it's released.
Mm-hmm.
But you're completely right. I have kind of divorced myself from Magic the Gathering as looking at it as a system, because I'm looking at it from a role play perspective as well. And that's just something you have to do. Like, for example, how do you translate something like Trample into a role play game? And the answer is, I turned Trample, the mechanic, into the Dungeons and Dragons feat Cleave, because that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that you have to do. You have to pragmatically look at what something does in a card game and what it looks like in real life. Things like hexproof, things like regeneration, all of these things have, or even things like hexproof and landwalk are both lumped in the same thing of phasing. Things that cut in and out of real space and time. They
Mm-hmm.
just phase through buildings and objects and whatnot. Yeah, it's about thinking around the box and creating new things to replace them. And I do that with the game pretty much from from its conception because I want it to be a role-playing game that Wizards provides me free material for.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the questions that I do have regarding this is
Mm-hmm.
because this is something that I could see feasibly getting out of hand, and that is in regard to some in regard to summoning, because
Summoning?
especially with
Yes.
certain deck strategies, trying to do that and trying to put that into the more traditional turn-based approach that you would see in a role-playing game could
Mm-hmm.
potentially result in issues because you've got so many moving parts. Is that something that you had considered, and if so, how are you planning on addressing that?
I have considered it, and it's easier than you think because the way that um, the way the system interacts with the Shade Mage and with the character and with the player, it's actually really difficult to get your shade or your mana. And it's all about your management of that shade or mana and casting a lot of shade summons or creature spells is something that would expose the mage to a lot of unnecessary danger. And even if they did it, managing a lot of shade summons is actually something is a reasonable strategy because um, written in the rules is I'm not going to make a shade summon make an attack roll. They're automatically going to deal damage and take damage themselves. Um, so and that's just because they are a shade spell. That is something that they're going to that's something that they're made to do. It's something that they're going to do. So have I considered the chances of them being OP and summoning a lot of creatures and having them do their bidding? Yes. Do I see it as an issue? Not really, because there are several factors hampering that from being a viable long-term strategy. One, you're going to have trouble getting the power for it. And another dynamic of Shades of Dominion is it's dystopian. It's not exactly Magic the Gathering where mana is just abundant and free. There is a limited amount of shade that you pull from the world that you're living on or that you're standing on. And if you pull too much, the world that you're on starts to die. So there is this kind of uh, reluctance initially, and there's a fear of saying if I take too much, the world is going to start to decay, to die, to go to a lower level of existence. And once that happens, as someone who's made the game and someone who's been a DM, at that point, I would have one of the mechanics is the natives start looking to kill you. So there are in-game consequences to using that much shade and power. So you have that dynamic hampering the strategy. Then you have another dynamic is just the creatures that you're going to be confronting in the game
Mm-hmm.
um, are they're not totally weaklings either. They're going to be able to deal out some hefty punishment. After you get past the humans and the beasts and the once you get to the monsters of the Shades of Dominion world, yeah, they're not weaklings. They're going to plow through your shade summons like butter. So you're going to have to think in long term about how you and your party are going to take them down, like any other game, like any other role playing game.
Mm-hmm. Which that does bring me to a question regarding things, because it could very well be argued, and I remember seeing this argument when I was looking at the early days of Magic, since since Richard Garfield, the creator of Magic, outright stated that he wanted decks to be as versatile and build as character creation in Dungeons and Dragons can
Mm-hmm.
be. And
Yes.
in that regard, one could argue the five colors, and we may as well throw in colorless, could be considered um, the character classes, or more accurately, archetypes. Are you planning on having a similar kind of archetype like setup? Um,
No, because I want the players to make their own archetypes. And as I said, it's all about letting the player, letting the person who's built this deck or has this character concept in their head. It's about letting them mix spells together and uh, discover and use the character aspects in a way that creates something new every time. One of the best things about Shades of Dominion is the amount of sheer diversity in the way and means in which you can combine things. Because each color, let me phrase it this way: Shades of Dominion is not archetyped by color; it's archetyped by attribute. Each color has 3 different attributes. So when you are combining different colors, what you're actually doing is, on varying degrees, you're combining attributes. So for example, in corruption, which is the black color, you're going to have ambition, darkness, and death. A very popular combination for black is going to be red, which is the destruction, which has another 3 attributes. It's going to be chaos, combustion, and passion. So your mage is ideally, if you're going to min-max like most players are going to do, or you're not going to min-max, you're going to be a combination of these 6 attributes as a black and red mage. Which means no person is ever going to create the same red and black mage twice. And that's kind of the point.
all right. Um, now one other thing when I said that a lot of the previous attempts at doing something like this are a little too married to the core rules of the card game, is is a reliance on still doing deck building and knowing how to do proper deck building. So the question I have is this: if I'm s- if I'm being shade master for this, I'm operating on the assumption that that's your term for the dungeon master,
Yes, correct.
and I have somebody who is fascinated with the lore of MTG and the like, but is not as experienced when it comes to deck building. How easy or difficult would it be for them to take to this?
Um, I don't think it'd be that difficult at all, because the way that it works is each attribute has a spell list or a spell templates list. And I'll be very honest, if you took to that spell templates list and you treated it as if you were building a deck, it's going to go very poorly, because it's going to go very poorly because after having play tested a few times and really getting people into their characters, what I've learned about Shades of Dominion is you have to choose a particular flavor, or like a favored spell or a favored tactic, because decks tend to be very diverse. You'd have at least, like, let's see, 60 cards, minus lands, and then you divide by 4 is the number of spells a typical deck has if you're going to be, shall we say, competitive.
Mm-hmm.
that strategy is not going. You can't take that basic deck list and copy paste into Shades of Dominion, because what will happen is each of those individual spells, each time you cast them, you'll have to recharge them. Each spell has a thing called spell battery, where you have to refresh them after each use. So what you're going to have to, what would be better is to create a character based on a spell concept. So if you're going to be a fire mage who's just casting lightning bolts everywhere, you would take that spell template lightning bolt and you would apply it multiple times in different spells with different variations. So you'd have a lightning bolt that's just regular lightning bolt. You'd have a double lightning bolt. You'd have a lightning bolt and with no regeneration or ignores immortality, as we would say in Shades of Dominion, because immortality replaces regeneration and indestructible. So you would have these different flavors of that same spell. So no, not really. Shades of Dominion really is its own experience in that regard, in that it focuses on the role playing more than the card game aspect. Because I myself, as a Magic the Gathering card player, have tried that approach with Shades of Dominion, and it doesn't go very well.
Yeah, I will admit in some of my early days, and I never finished it, but I distinctly remember trying to do a kind of in spirit approach to Magic the Gathering using the saga system that TSR had made with Marvel Adventure and Dragonlance Fifth Age as a base. I unfortunately never finished it because it was on one of my old computers and that thing went belly up and I just wasn't able to recover the data. But I do. It's one of the reason I bring that up is because I'm kind of getting a sense of what you're trying to do, where it definitely is doing them. It's definitely doing a Magic like experience, but it's not trying to. It's not quite trying to copy the deck and the card effects wholesale in the way a lot of other attempts at doing this have. Because a lot of the
Well, I'll be honest. I've had to do that somewhat just for it to make some kind of sense. There are obviously buff spells where I have to increase. How would I say it? I have to increase their attack skill and their damage by 3 for spells like Growth, because that's a legitimate spell, and there is some copy pasta there. Mm-hmm. But as a concept, no, it's very yes, the spell templates themselves are still mechanical, and they're still limited. They're still very and that's the thing you'll notice about Magic the Gathering is the spells are very mechanically precise. In that sense, yes, the spell creation in Shades of Dominion is mechanically precise. That I cannot avoid. But in terms of them having application to other settings that are relevant to role playing, no, they're very that's not a problem in Shades of Dominion.
Mm-hmm. Which, since we brought up the spell template thing, let's go through that in a bit more detail. Walk me through an example of how you would go from spell template to the spell for a proper character in Shades of Dominion.
Well, I'll be honest. A spell template can serve as a proper spell. A spell template is simply something that it was very autistic. It took every ounce of my autism to make these spell templates for each attribute in each category. But basically how they work is if you want to combine spell templates, You combine their effects, you combine their shade cost. After you get their shade cost, it determines their spell battery, and you have a new spell. The only thing that does not stack, using that Magic the Gathering term, stacked, the only thing that does not combine is when you combine shade summoning templates, and they only get one wound. So shade summoning creatures always have one wound no matter how many templates are included. That's the only thing that never ever stacks. Everything else, you just add them together. You literally just say, I want this effect, and that effect, and you add all of the shade costs together. You have your own spell battery for that spell, and that's it. That is the spell that you now have to work with.
Oh, all right, I get where that's going. Now when you talk about shade, the vibe that I'm getting from that is that it's not exact. Is that while it might be easy to assume that it's an analog to mana, it doesn't sound like that's entirely the case. Could you go into a bit more detail about the shade, mechanically speaking?
Okay, what the shade is this is a dystopian world where magic has essentially died. And in its death, they found something else lying, quote unquote, underneath. They found the shade. The shade is a part of every living world, except it's finite, as I've stated before. Each world only has so much shade it can offer up to any shade mage in particular. The mechanics of using the shade is it has to be used through a medium called a shade vessel. And how it works is the shade is siphoned from the world to the shade vessel, and then it is sipped from the shade vessel to the shade mage. And these are all I'm referencing the names of roles for these mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
So the shade is essentially the life force of these worlds that people are living on. So when you sip from your shade vessel, you have to stain your shade, and that staining process is how you know whether your shade is stained with the various dominions and colors, as it were. So you're right, it is a different process, and it is not completely analogous to the 5 colors, because it does have that rare resource feel to it.
All right. Because of that, would that mean that that there's a degree of sparingness regarding how frequently that mages could use their spells?
There's nothing from stopping a shade mage from going crazy and destroying the realm just because they want to. The reason they don't want to is because of horrible things that'll happen when they do. But there is a sense of responsibility for a shade mage to not, shit where they eat. There is that inbuilt mechanic, and so yes, in a sense, there is that impending fear of scarcity in the back of their minds. And that is something that, and here's the scarier thing about Shades of Dominion, is you're never told by the Shade Master how much shade is left in the realm. You are like, it's a complete blind. And the only way you know is when something really bad happens and the Shade Master announces, okay, your world has dropped in its level of existence and the inhabitants are angry and looking to kill you. Until then, you have really no notion or metric how much shade is left in a realm, except for the descriptions given by the Shade Master.
All right. Now, earlier you had said that each of the five colors in this case have three associated attributes. Could you walk me through what each trinity the colors have?
Sure. First, we have the Ether Shade. That is the blue color. For those of you who want to use magic parlance. And their attributes are illusion, manipulation, and knowledge. For the corruption shade, that is the black color, they have ambition, darkness, and death. For destruction, which is our red color, we're going to have chaos, combustion, and passion. For the purity, which is the white, we're going to have light, order, and protection.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the vitality, which is our green color, you're going to have growth, instinct, and nature.
All right.
And throughout the entire character creation and spell creation, you're going to be sticking to or mixing these various attributes together to create new spells.
So it sounds like the way you describe it, it would be feasible for two players to player characters to have the same color, like say vitality, as their focus, but not use it the same way.
Exactly.
Um,
And the reason I did that is because that's what Magic the Gathering really does reflect. You have those, for example, Vitality mages who are like Garuk, who are, big, beefy, they like a lot of creatures. And then you have the other style of Vitality magic, which is fast, cunning, and deadly. And then you have the Elven mages who, like big, hefty creatures, but they're more in tune with mana generation. These are the different aspects of that Vitality Dominion.
oh, all right. Um, Now, here's a bit of a hypothetical for you. Now, despite the issues with the Ravnica D&D book that we talked about earlier, um,
Mm-hmm.
there is a dear friend of mine who, when Ravnica had just started out, when it was just Ravnica City of Guilds, his deck at that time was a Boros deck, so he used a lot of red and white. Um,
Mm-hmm.
given the nature of Boros, of this very militaristic faction, what subtypes would you end up recommending for him to focus on if you were to do kind of a incarnation of that approach in Shades?
I will be very, very honest. That depends entirely on the deck list. And not necessarily the deck list, but the flavor of the character he wants them to have. Because Ravnica only covers color combinations as if they are simply one-dimensional, as if they're just white and red or black and white. The difference with my system is Boros might use the entire spectrum of white, they might use the entire spectrum of red. The question is, what kind of character does your friend want to build, and what spells will be reflected in that character? Um, so,
I think
uh,
I think for the purposes of narrowing it down, let's
mhm,
suppose that his approach is basically a lead from the front kind of commander, or
mhm,
lead from the front kind of commanding crusader. Let me clarify.
okay. Okay, so we would definitely have um, order and passion would be the attributes he would focus on, and he would also have a little. He would focus on order and passion, and he would have a lot of splash into combustion.
All right, that definitely makes sense. Um,
Yeah, it does make sense
mhm.
because in passion is actually one of the because passion is a red or destruction attribute. It actually represents something that's kind of almost been forgotten in Magic: The Gathering. It's an older kind of subset in the flavor of red. Passion is the cards that are like act of treason or about face or in the modern reincarnation of the passion like attribute, it's giving a soldier first strike even though he's red. Like that's what the passion represents. So order is good because it do do do. Order is good because it instill that kind of discipline, and it does help make your creatures tougher, which would be good for someone who wanted to lead from the front. They would have to be very resilient,
Mhm.
and their spells would reflect that. So if I had to just go offhand without any other inspiration, order, passion, and combustion.
All right, I can definitely see where that's going. Now, since you've talked about conversion, I want to try and hit you with a few keywords from Magic, and I'd be curious to see how how you would handle adapting these into shades, since you've talked about a few of them.
Okay.
All right. The first one I'll go with is vigilance.
Vigilance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Vigilance is that's easy because every time a creature or entity attacks, even in the role playing game, you still have to take your actions. You still have to exhaust. You still have to do all these things when you attack. Um, Vigilance just basically says this person with this aspect of vigilance doesn't exhaust when they attack, or whenever they take they don't exhaust in combat is what the aspect would say.
All right. Um, in the, that being said, now? I will admit I'm bringing this one up in solely because of the fact that I was a bit of a sucker for the Kamigawa block, but I'll bring up two from that were introduced there. The
Oh
fir-
no.
the I know it's got its problems, but it's a guilty pleasure of mine. Plus, I had the novels, but
All right.
the first one, which might be a little bit easier, is Bushido.
Okay. Now I don't have that right in front of me. Just give me a refresher as to what Bushido does.
Bushido is always written with a numbered value. And when a creature
Mm-hmm.
with Bushido blocks or is blocked, it gets a boost to strength and toughness equal to its Bushido value until the end of the turn.
Got it. Okay. Um, the way that would actually be a either a character aspect, and that's how do I put this? That's the thing about um, that. My follow up question would be: do you want this to because these are static abilities, these are static keywords? Most of these things are going to be what is called in Shades of Dominion character aspects. Character aspects are these things that they fulfill two roles simultaneously, and that's why I'm glad we're going over the keywords, because it allows me to introduce this concept of character aspects. Character aspects are they cover things like Bushido, and what they are is they're aspects that the character picks up that are a combination of things that imitate keywords like Bushido, and they also cover traditional Dungeons and Dragons like feats. That's the purpose of character aspects. Is it's kind of melding the global enchantment, the static keywords, and the and Dungeons and Dragons like feats uh, into one banner, so that you can create that character with these static abilities. And the benefit to that of having these keywords, these enchantments as character aspects, is these are strategies that don't apply to individual creatures. They're going to apply to all of your creatures. They're going to apply to these is going to be a mainstay of your character that you have built in.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's what makes it different is I'm not looking for a creature with Bushido. I am improving myself and growing in the shade so that everything I touch has that particular quality to it.
All right, that definitely makes sense. Now the other Kamigawa one, I when I think about it and try in this kind of adaptation might be a bit tricky, and it was infamously used in a lot of black decks back then. But ninjutsu.
I actually knew you were going to ask me about that one. Ninjutsu. No, and I'm excited to explain it to you. Ninjutsu is one of those character aspects that your character isn't going to start out with. It's going to be one of those character aspects that you have to earn up to, and it's something that you have to hash out with your shade mage, how you're going to get it, and what your shade affliction for that character aspect is going to be. Because for character aspects that are not um, regular or planned for in the core rulebook, you can introduce new character aspects. You can create things like ninjutsu. Um, and I'll explain how that translates into the game. Not a problem, um, but you will have to create for character aspects like ninjutsu. You will have to create your own appropriate shade affliction for that character aspect. Now, how ninjutsu would work in the game is either one of two ways, and this can go either a stealth, corruption, aether character, and it also depends. And this is important too. It depends through which attribute you use it with, because another popular color that had ninjutsu was blue as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you had that illusion manipulation aspect as well as that darkness and that darkness aspect to it. So it would depend on the combination of attributes, what powers you're utilizing and what effect they're going to have. Are you going to ninjutsu and deliver stress counters to your opponent? Are you going to ninjutsu and just deal raw necrotic damage to your opponent? Are you going to ninjutsu and when I say ninjutsu, it's going to be a teleportation between either you or a Shinsan.
All right.
And that's how it would function. It would be a teleportation character aspect, and it would be something that you would have to build to. And that's going to be part of your journey as a Shade Mage. And I don't know if you or your audience has already gotten this feel to it, but there's no leveling system in Shades of Dominion. It's very
I
much
can
like
I had kind of deciphered that.
Yeah, there's no leveling system. You're going to have to adventure out and get the scrolls, get your temple, get your library points so you can build new spells, so you can find new focuses, so you can up your shade capacity, so you can make larger spells. Yeah, you're going to be ad hocing, piecing together your own character from scratch after creation. In fact, the idea that you can that you're going to be able to cast all the spells. Like, let's say you brought a deck and it's a competitive deck, and you want to run this deck as a character. Chances are you're not going to be able to play most of the spells in that deck to start anyway. So it's just having the deck playable in this system is a goal in and of itself that you yourself are going to have to adventure and build to.
Mm-hmm. And
so go on with the aspects, because this is actually kind of fun.
um, I'll go with one that I I remember being one that I enjoyed to a degree.
Hmm.
Let's go with kicker.
Ooh, kicker. I will be very, very honest that when I was making the spell templates, when I was going through finding the spells that have the most powerful effect in a certain attribute or in a certain flavor of a color or part of an attribute, things like kicker were things that my brain had to turn off because there was so many possibilities that I just had to focus in on just getting the raw spell template done. With things like kicker, um, I'll be honest, I don't have an immediate translation for that because things like kicker, um, within the game, there's something called well, first of all, there's these things called cantrips where you can pay shade to get a bonus to your skill tests.
Mm-hmm.
After that, there's a thing called a shade test where you can pay shade and accomplish a feat or use your shade vessel as a ex deus machina of sorts, where
Mm-hmm.
if you're on a world, you're fresh on it, and you walk up to a book, you could pay a shade and make a knowledge roll or a perception roll and determine whether or not the shade will help you read this book. So when you're talking about things like kicker, will it be possible in the game to upgrade your spell based on an additional skill test? Maybe, but I would definitely use it as a skill test, not as an additional spell.
All right.
Is
Um,
that something I've hashed out in the game yet? Hell no.
okay.
But that is how I would handle it.
Um, Now another one that I remember in the in the core game having a significant amount of fun with was Storm, and maybe this applies into the same category as with Kicker.
Okay, so Storm is hmm. I can't remember storm. I'm trying to think of the keyword storm, and I know it's wrong because the proper keyword for what I'm thinking of is cascade. What was the difference between what is storm the one that turns um, target into all?
No.
Okay,
Um,
remind me what storm is then, because I'm drawing a blank.
I'm gonna read off from my note. Um, when a spell with Storm is played, you co- you copy that spell in the stack for each spell cast before Storm did on that turn, getting that many instances of it.
Ah, Okay, that would again be a character aspect. That would be that would be like a mad genius Izet like character. Um, Probably using the attributes of chaos, combustion, and knowledge just for shits and giggles.
Mm-hmm. All right. All right. So I and if, now for a bit of an easier one, I suppose would be something like haste.
Actually, haste was something I had to. Haste is not what you think it would be. Sure, haste in this game means that a shade summon with it can attack as soon as it's summoned. It's as soon as it's summoned, anything within 5 feet gets attacked by it. That's obvious with haste. But another aspect of the haste aspect, which I've renamed as rush. It's known as rush in this game, and the main mechanic of rush is at any time that that you are exhausted in combat, you can use a free action to ready yourself. So it's someone's ability to recover from an attack. Because in the combat system, when you're wounded, you're automatically exhausted. So it makes things like goblins, which have at least 2 wounds, incredibly dangerous because even though you've wounded them, they're still not going to exhaust. And if
Mm-hmm.
you attack something that is exhausted and can't defend itself, you automatically get a bonus to that attack. Goblins you will never get that advantage on because as a racial characteristic they have this rush ability. So rush is something that's far more integrated into the roleplay experience.
All right. For the let me make sure I get the one for this. For the last one on this because with how many keywords Magic has, this is something that could go for hours on end.
We could do this forever. That's why I distinctly recall avoiding doing this.
Well, I've sooner or later you were gonna get this kind of question, so it's one of those cases of best to rip off the band-aid while you can.
Uh-huh.
Um, but the last one that I want to go into, because this one might be, I could see being a bit tricky, is madness.
Ooh, madness. Madness is when you get to play something. No, that is madness, right? When you get to play something when it's being discarded.
Yes, if it's discarded, you
Okay,
can pay the madness cost and cast it.
not really, because there are abilities, there are spells that call for you to exhaust things in your spell list. So, for example, there are abilities from a shade summon that say exhaust a spell. So there is, you could have a character aspect that has a an ability like madness where it says as a spell is being exhausted but not cast, you may cast it for X cost or its own. You may cast it as it's being exhausted. That's not too difficult because the spells do have a ready and exhaust setting because they do have to be recharged after each use. So there is a role play and a mechanical purpose to something like madness.
All right. Um, Now you had talked a bit about checks, which is one of those questions that I probably should have asked earlier. But when it comes to checks, I'm assuming that this is going to be your system for resolving actions when it isn't when the conclusion isn't foregone, when there's some risk of success or failure.
Of course.
What sort of system are you
Um,
using for this? Are you using a standard die roll? Are you using a die pool? What kind of approach are you taking?
yes. Let me not be a dick. There are two systems. There's the skill test system, which is every skill test is your skill score plus 3 die 6. It's a 3 die 6 DC system for your skill checks, for your combat rolls, for your defense rolls. Everything is run on 3d6.
All right.
Your shade rolls are are a combination of dice pool and storytelling dice. So if you're doing a basic 1 die roll for let's say it's a spell, you're using a half action for spell battery. Just I want to remember one of my spells or recharge one of my spells. You would make a spell battery roll rolling a die 6. The result would tell you um, which spells you can recharge based on your result.
All right.
Your siphon, your stain, and your sip rolls are all dice pools based on your shade score. And they're based on the storytelling system used for the die 6. Now, your shade score determines how many dice you roll when you do all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
But when you stain, your score determines how the result. Let me rephrase that. You're going to roll a dice pool of X dice. Your score determines which out of those dice are stained based on the score you have in that particular dominion. So, for example, if your score in Aether is going to be a 4, then you're going to pull Stain Shade for that dominion on a 3+.
All right.
So that's how the shade system works. That's how the quote-unquote magic system works in comparison to the skill system.
All right. In that case, I can see where it's going. When it comes to the skill system, would there be any effect if somebody rolls some degree of snake eye or eyes or some degree of boxcars?
No, not really. We just do straight. Whatever the result is, that's what the result is.
All right.
Because it's 3 die 6. There's no need to rub insult to injury.
No,
If you roll 3 ones,
the GM is probably going to rub insult to injury enough as it is.
exactly. I don't need to. I don't need to rules it in. We're all very well acclimated to the culture. We're going to. If you roll a 3 in Shades of Dominion, it's not only is it embarrassing, but it's just not going to go well for you in roleplay terms. That's just how it works. That's just how the cookie crumbles. And I trust the gaming community to already know this.
Yeah. There's a in the temple we have a bit of a saying on that kind of thing, and that is very simply, the dice gods show no mercy. Amen.
No, they don't. And neither will your Shade Master.
No. Oh, it's also the reason why you have the old saying that that NPCs are character background to players and character blackmail to GMs.
Uh-huh. Oh, no. In Shades of Dominion, it's worse. Because in Shades of Dominion, character aspects that function as your enchantment
Mm-hmm.
keywords and your feats. Attached to those are these things called shade afflictions. And these shade afflictions, like for example, I wanted the game to be true to the form of the card game, meaning and in a character like sense. So, for example, if you have a a pyromancer who's just blasting through shit, I don't want the pyromancer being the face of the group. So the shade afflictions for the pyromancer is um, anytime he enters a new setting or a new town, he has to set something on fire. Or anytime another shade affliction for him is anytime someone disrespects you, you have to challenge them to a fight or uh, get violent. Because that's the kind of destruction mage that you are. You have these shade afflictions, uh, really pulling these shade mages into the roles that they're supposed to fill in the shade. That's what makes the shade different from mana. It's actually a constraint as well as a boon.
Which
So, go on.
I can definitely I can definitely see that, and it does tie into that dystopian vibe that you're trying to go for.
Yes. Oh, you should see some of the shade afflictions for purity. I just advertised like one of the shade afflictions for purity. If you're like into healing and you want to be the good guy and you want to do all this good stuff and you choose the attributes for the light attribute in the in the combat section, it straight up says you must tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And that's and violating a shade affliction. Uh, this is why I love making this system. Violating shade afflictions invokes shade burn, which is a harkening back to back when we had mana burn. Except it's not through using too much mana; it's from violating the shade. And so you take damage not when you violate your shade affliction, but you take damage when you next use the shade after violating your shade affliction.
Mm-hmm. And which is definitely something I appreciate, because I always love those sort of power at a cost kind of approaches.
Yes.
That the when you've talked about worlds in that sense, which harkens me
Mm-hmm.
to a game called The Strange that had a kind of mechanical setup for world hopping. In regard to that, I'm curious how the the Shade Master is going to handle multiple worlds and the possibility of world hopping. Is that something that's going to be built into the campaign, or are you focused on one specific world for the time being?
It's not focused on any world, to be honest. Um, the Shades of Dominion is presumes that the Shade has the characters where it wants them at all times. Um, the there is an introduction campaign that I'm doing where walking off the world is not an option. It's not something that the Shade permits you to do. And the players get this sense of dread that they're in the middle of a a Shade related mission because it's not letting them leave. So you do have that kind of discretion with your characters. And the reason I did that as an introduction campaign is just to put them through the ropes of learning how to use the Shade
Mm-hmm.
and getting them not getting them mired in, oh my gosh, how many worlds are there? No, you're it lets them know that yes, there are other worlds because you were just sucked from yours into this one. But I give the Shade Master complete control over where their players can and can't go. Let's just put it that way.
I'm getting a vibe of a wizard is never late, nor is he early.
No, the wizard is wherever he's told to be by his master. Is more the feel to it.
Well, the third part of that line is he arrives exactly where he is needed. So
there you go.
There you go. There you go on that part on that particular front. Um, see now talking a bit about future plans, since you did mention having a introductory setup. Do you have any plans to release that, or like a quick start version as a PDF or something similar in the future?
Yes, that is where I have. There's so much things. There's so much you do when you're launching these things, or when you're getting ready to launch. I still haven't gotten my Indiegogo up, which is the one I'm going to be working on this following week. Is getting that set up. Now there's getting the finishing touches done on the core rule. There's getting a DM screen, which I'm actually excited about. There's an entire panel of the Shademaster screen that's dedicated to your characters and their shade afflictions, so you know what to throw at them at any given point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Just to add that shade-like dynamic to the game, to know what your character's hang-ups are. There's going to be an expanded spell book that's going to include things like shade armor and steeds, which is basically things that your shade mage can ride on. And shade armor is going to be a combination of artifacts, and it's going to be the system's version of walls. Is the shade armor that they're going to be able to cast. So there is an expansion to the spells, because in this core set that I have, you don't get any spell templates that are above the cost of one Stained Shade. So it's a very basic, very beginner starter set feel to it. And we're going to have the expansion out after I get the core rulebook out.
Right.
And after I get the core rulebook out, we'll have the screen, and then after I get the expanded spellbook, then I will start working on elaborating on cross dominion spell templates and character aspects for combined attribute. And that's when you see things for ninjutsu, things for a lot of the keywords that we've gone over, and that's when you'll really start to see the world of Magic the Gathering come through in a Shades of the Dominion-like environment.
Which is definitely something I will look forward to. And while I will put out a disclosure when I do it, I get the feeling that when some digital version of this thing comes around and finds its way into my temple, I will be doing a deep dive into what's there.
Okay.
Simply because my whole goal here is to expand the umbrella of tabletop gaming outside of the easy stuff.
Yeah, and I was actually listening to your podcast on Axe, and I was impressed because one of the goals for Shades of Dominion, as you can imagine, one of the long-term goals for a Shades of Dominion character is the creation of your own realm or plane. So Shades of Dominion will have that kind of aspect to it much later, but we're definitely working towards there as well.
I do.
Um,
Mhm.
well, so when you talk about things that are not as simplistic, absolutely, that is the direction we're going.
Yep. And thank you for listening to to me and Archon blow hot air for for 3 hours. um, that being said, I do know you are on a bit of a time crunch, so I'm not so I won't go too farther. I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time to come into the temple, and I hope to have you back sometime in the future.
It's been a pleasure. As soon as I get things launched, as soon and you and I will stay in contact. As soon as I get an Indiegogo set up, I'll contact you and we'll collaborate and probably do another stream on that.
Hmm.
But yeah, absolutely. I will I will be in touch, sir. And it's been a pleasure being on.
Yep. Um, as far as the rest of it, again, in a few hours, Monastery Live will return. We will have a fair smattering of games to highlight, news to go over, and geeks to laugh at, and clowns
Oof.
who are continually banned from my temple.
And also fuck Brie Larson.
What did I just say about clowns?
I couldn't help it. I told you I would defile the temple, did I not? You were warned. You were fucking warned.
Yes, I was. But in all seriousness,
I was so good up until this point. I couldn't help it. God damn it, Mildra.
yeah, you'll fit in this place very very well. I can definitely
I've
say
been
that.
talking shop for too long. I had to cut loose, and it's the last couple minutes. I'm gonna give you hell. So, on that note, I will bid you adieu. I do have family business.
Yes. You can pick your nose, but you can't pick your family.
You'd be surprised. I'm Italian.
Oh, my sympathies. No, I'm kidding, man. um, with all that said,
Oh, your name just went on the list. So, what size shoes do you wear?
I am not answering that.
All right, man.
All right. So on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.